Hello and welcome back, Eddie Radosevich. George Stoia here from the SoonersScoop.com studios on Campus Quarter. Welcome back to the SoonersScoop.com YouTube page, and it's here. I mean, it really is here. The football season begins for Oklahoma on Wednesday as camp, I guess, technically begins on Wednesday. I know they were doing some meetings on Tuesday to they do the big weigh-in and all that kind of stuff. Yep. So you see all that kind of stuff filtering around on the social media. Obviously, it was a really good summer for a number of guys. Yep. PJ Adebawore up, what was it, to 260? I know that Brent said that at SEC Media Days, but here it is. I mean, we got about 30 days now from kickoff. I guess 31 technically as we get here to the end of July.
Yeah, and I think it's around like 18 practices they'll do in fall camp, and that's leading into the week or two of prep before the first game against Temple. So super exciting. Like I think there's so many different storylines with this team. Obviously, expectations I think locally are high. Nationally are low.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference in between the people that are here in the Oklahoma bubble and watched every game a year ago and understood where they kind of were or where they were coming from really in that first year under Brent Venables and going 6-7, getting to double-digit wins a year ago. But there is a lot of I think a lot of question marks about this team and what it's going to look like, what it's going to be going into the SEC. There's a reason why Oklahoma was a preseason number 8 in the SEC.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. I don't know when the AP poll comes out. The preseason.
Thinking about I think it's 2 weeks, I want to say.
Yeah.
Brett McMurphy, I think, tweeting about that.
I'm curious to see where OU lands in that. I do think they'll be in the top 25, but where at?
Top 20?
I think around there. I could see anywhere from
like 17 to 22, something like that.
Something like that. I could see them as high as like maybe 15 as well. It depends. We'll see. I just know the national media aren't as high, and I think it's valid in a lot of ways because when you have a new quarterback, you have new coordinators, you have an entirely new offensive line, which we're going to get into here in a second. I think that it's valid, but I do think that as we go through this and as we kind of preview fall camp, the pieces are there, or at least we feel like the pieces are there for Oklahoma. Oklahoma obviously feels like the pieces are there. Now guys need to emerge, and this is where you start hearing, guys maybe winning competitions, standing out that are going to be huge contributors this year.
It's going to be really kind of interesting over the next 30 days as they iron some of those issues out. And we wanted to jump into a number of storylines going into preseason camp today. And I think that, it's going to be pretty obvious where we're going to start. We're going to start on the offensive line as Bill Bedenbaugh. I think he certainly has his work cut out for him. It sounds like some of the coaches maybe a little bit higher on the offensive line than a lot of people outside of the building. But at the same time, they do have experience. You brought in Branson Hickman. He's going to be your starting center. Obviously, Troy Everett's going to be hampered with, I guess his rehabilitation coming off the knee injury during the spring. But, George, Brent Venables said it last week at the coaches' convention or the coaches' luncheon. They feel pretty strongly about what they have at guard, center, guard. The big question mark is going to be kind of what happens at that tackle position, both sides of it.
It's going to be really interesting, Eddie, because there's a chance that this new offensive line has maybe 4 or 5, transfers starting on it. And that's kind of crazy to think about when you bring in that many guys. And these are guys that they feel really high about because they have played a lot of football. Like I can't remember the exact stat, but it's like,
you wrote the story about it, just how much experience they actually do have.
Yeah, it's something like 50 plus starts among the transfers they brought in versus, I think it's like 13 starts among the guys coming back from last year's roster. So they bring in a lot of experience, but can those guys fit in the right places? And it's up to Bill Bedenbaugh to figure out who are his best 5 and where do they fit. Because I think that we've always said, Jacob Sexton's a left tackle. Well, during the spring, he was playing a lot of left guard. Now Garen Hatchett's back. Could he compete for that left guard spot? You move Sexton back out to left tackle to compete with Michael Tarquin, who's played a lot of football. Michael Tarquin's played some of the most football on this roster, but has his limitations. You look at center, you bring in a Branson Hickman. It sounds like Troy Everett is doing better. I don't know if he'll be ready to go to start fall camp, but is that a competition truly, or is it Branson Hickman's job to lose? I lean towards that. Fabechi Nwewu, obviously, I think that he's kind of locked up that right guard spot. I think that he's kind of the guy to beat there. And then right tackle's the one position, Eddie, that I truly don't know which direction it's going to go. Jake Taylor got a lot of those snaps in the spring. Spencer Brown I don't know if he was dealing with an injury or just wasn't.
Yeah, let's be honest about it. I mean, the spring for Spencer Brown did not go as I think a lot of people thought it would, and especially coming off of Walter Rouse and what he was able to produce for Oklahoma, coming in and almost immediately becoming that guy at one of the tackle positions. It was an up and down spring, but it does sound like it's been a better summer. I should also say, too, that the Outland Trophy watch list comes out on Tuesday. Branson Hickman's name is included in that.
Yeah, I have high expectations for Hickman. Look, is he going to be a guy that plays a lot on Sundays and look like Creed Humphrey out there? No, but I do think that he can be productive. You're going to know what you get from him on a consistent basis, snap to snap, and I think that that's going to be really helpful. And he's played a lot of football, so I think that comfortability with Jackson Arnold, that's what you want to see in fall camp. Can they kind of build their rapport? I know those two have become pretty close in the offseason, so that's going to be really interesting. And then, like you said, the right tackle spot is just going to be fascinating to watch because let's say, I mean, and you mentioned Spencer Brown had a good summer. I've heard the same things about Jake Taylor. Sure. And it's been a long time coming for Jake Taylor, right? We've talked a lot about him. It feels like every year we're like, can Jake Taylor find a role on this offensive line? And it's now or never for a guy like him, right? Like he has to figure it out this year. And if he doesn't, is it Spencer Brown or does Bill Beadham go say, you know what? Our best five is Jacob Sexton somewhere out there. Maybe he can play right tackle and you live with Michael Tarquin at left tackle. Maybe that's what it looks like. I don't know, but that's what fall camp is for. And so I'm interested to see. And, look, somebody's going to get hurt probably at some point, knock on wood, but like you have to be able to have depth and have guys be able to play different positions. So that offensive line, like we're going to dive into some of these other positions where you feel more comfortable about these guys and you maybe have a better picture of what this is going to look like. We have no idea what this offensive line is going to look like other than maybe right guard.
Yeah.
Like with Fabecci, like that's the only spot that I'm really like, I'm confident he's going to be the guy.
I feel pretty confident about the center position, obviously, with Branson Hickman, and he was almost a little bit of a godsend for Oklahoma to be able to get him from SMU, and especially in the time that he came in, you needed a center, obviously, with Troy Everett's injury. What do you make of the left side, the left guard position, the left tackle position? I think we both feel strongly that, or maybe not strongly, but feel like Jake Sexton could end up at left tackle. Heath Ozaida has been a guy that I feel like we've been talking about for years, but you go all the way back to the bowl practices. He'd kind of started to make a little bit of a name for himself over at left guard.
Yeah, I really like Keith Ozaida. I'm curious to see if he can win that job because I thought he had a great spring. Among the offensive linemen, he was up there as one of the guys that really had one of the best springs. But Jacob Sexton also played some left guard, and I don't know if that was because they just didn't have the bodies, right? With Hatchett being out.
Wasn't it, if I remember correctly, it was kind of one of those situations that like all we heard for those first couple of weeks were how poorly the offensive line was performing, and then he moved inside, and all of a sudden it felt like they kind of opened a secret weapon or something.
Right, and I think that's because I truly think when Jacob Sexton is healthy, he's one of, if not their best offensive lineman. Like and you saw that last year. I mean, he came in and played for Tyler Guyton late in the year, who ended up being a first-round draft pick, and Jacob Sexton was really good. I'm not saying he was as good as Tyler Guyton or better, but he's a really good football player, and so I think if they can find a way to get him on the field, wherever that may be, Bill Bedenbaugh is going to do it. So I'm interested. I think he's going to move back out to left tackle because he has his that's his best spot, and I think that look, there might be some growing pains early on with him, whereas Michael Tarquin, you kind of know what you got, but I think Sexton at left tackle. And then you have Ozaida, and then I think Garen Hatchett is somebody to really watch because
very much a wild card, just because we don't know a whole lot about how he's going to be used following a spring in which he was inactive, he was unavailable.
Right. Well, and even going back to his days at Washington, he played all sorts of different positions. Like he's not a guy that's just played one position. Like he hasn't just been a left guard. He's played some right guard. He's played some center. He's been like a almost like they would use him in these supersets where he'd be like almost like a tight end on the edge. And so like he's somebody that I'm curious to see. I think his floor is higher than somebody like Keith Ozaida. And you're going to deal with maybe some growing pains with him, whereas Ozaida's ceiling is probably higher than Hatchett. So again, curious to see what Bill Bedenbaugh does. We know in Bill's history, he loves to play guys that are a little bit older, a little bit more experienced. Sure. So it wouldn't shock me if Hatchett ended up being the starting left guard to start the season.
Which makes it interesting because there was somebody that, just asked me on, I think it was Tuesday morning, just in terms of, are any of the freshman guys supposed to contribute? Daniel Akinkumi, Eugene Brooks, Eddie Pierre-Louis, who looks excellent in some of the pictures that have been put out from over the summer. I would say that, obviously they're pretty high on those guys moving forward into their careers in Norman, but at the same time, I don't know if it's going to be a comfortable thing if you look up and all of a sudden Eddie Puer-Luis has won a job coming out of camp or something.
See, it's going to be a Caden Green situation,
Sure.
I think, in the sense that I would be very surprised if any true freshmen are starting week 1. Now, if you told me partway through the season Eddie Puer-Luis overtook a spot at left guard or something, or Fabechi went down at right guard and he was injured and you needed somebody, it would not shock me if Eddie Puer-Luis was the guy, or even a Eugene Brooks, who we heard a lot about. Daniel Akinkumi, we'll see, just because he got hurt in the spring. I don't really know his availability for fall camp, so I wouldn't expect him to be a huge factor. And I also think the learning curve for him is a little bit steeper than these other guys, where I think Eddie Puer-Luis comes in and Eugene Brooks, and they could hold their own. Like they could figure it out. Sure, they'll make some mental mistakes, but kind of like Caden Green, they are physically ready to play.
That kind of wraps it into the second storyline coming into preseason camp. And we just mentioned a ton of those transfer guys that are going to be instant contributors, especially on that offensive line. But there are a number of other guys coming in, whether it be a Bauer Sharp, whether it be a Deion Burks, whether it be a Jake Roberts, another tight end in Joe John Finley's room, that are very much contributors from day one when you start camp.
Yeah, on the offensive side, you look at the impact of the transfers, and I think you're going to see it all over the field. Obviously, Deion Burks at wide receiver, we've talked about how high we are in him. I think that he's a guy that could lead the team in receiving this year. I think he can do a lot of different things. And when you talk about replacing Drake Stoops, which is going to be difficult to do,
sure,
this is a guy that I think gives you even more versatility than Stoops did. And you can play him in the slot. You can play him outside. You can do some different routes with him that maybe you couldn't do with Stoops. So you love that. I think Bauer Sharp is obviously a guy that we've talked a lot about. I'm interested to see what that tight end room kind of looks like and kind of the rotation there, because I do think it's going to be a combination of Sharp and Roberts. And then you look at, like you said, the offensive line, special teams, Tyler Keltner, odds-on favorite to win the kicking job, which we'll get into special teams a little bit later. And then even the defensive side of the ball, I'm curious to see, obviously, Dominic Williams. We know he's going to play
number 1A out of everybody when you're talking about instant impact contributors coming for the transfer portal.
And what does that look like? I'm curious to see what kind of defense are they going to run. And I thought it was interesting last week at the luncheon that Brent and Zach Alley were both kind of saying, is it going to be Zach Alley's defense? Is it going to be Brent Venables' defense? Is it going to be a combination? I'm sure it's going to be a combination. I think they're going to run a multiple defense. You're going to see some 3-3-5 type defenses out there. You're also going to see a 4-man front. And do you play Dominic Williams and DJ Terry together? Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see. And then the one that I'm really curious about, Eddie, also on the defensive side in terms of transfers, is Des Malone.
Yep.
What does he look? And I know we'll get into the secondary in a second, but
quietly had a very, very, very good spring.
Yeah, and I think he had a good summer. I'm sure he's still kind of getting settled in. But when you talk about that corner spot, is Woody Washington? Where's Woody Washington playing? And if he's not playing corner, that opens the door for a guy like Des Malone to start, or a Kenai Walker who's coming back, or maybe a young guy, Jacoby Johnson. Like, I'm really interested to see if Des Malone can maybe carve out a role for himself.
That rolls into the third storyline that we wanted to discuss today. And when you talk about this secondary, we've spent, it seems like months talking about the way that Brandon Hall's recruited with Josh. We've talked about the way that Jay Valai has basically re-envisioned that quarterback room. There's a bunch of guys, and particularly when you're talking about, like, in comparison to an offensive line, that it's like, yeah, I could see him. There's a number of guys when you start getting through the cornerbacks into the safety room, that it's like, okay, yeah, I think that he's not only going to be a contributor, but he could be a big-time player for Oklahoma.
I love the secondary group. I think that they've got so many different guys that you could throw out there and you'd feel good about. Now, there's some young guys that they're going to have to go through some growing pains.
Sure.
Jacoby Johnson's one of them that I'm really interested in at corner. Like, can he maybe find a role in the rotation? I think he's going to, and I think he's kind of a big playmaker, but he might also have some busts, right? Because he's a young guy, hasn't played a lot. And then that safety room, we all know Billy Bowman. He's going to be starting over there.
Sure. Everybody knows Peyton Bowen, the former five-star.
I think everybody's kind of just slotted Peyton Bowen into that other safety spot.
I know where you're going on this.
And I'm just telling people, watch out for Robert Spears-Jennings. The reviews, I know he was great in the spring, but the reviews coming out of the summer is that this guy has a chance to be very special.
Sure.
And again, I think you're going to see different formations where they have 3 safety looks, and maybe that's a Peyton Bowen or Woody Washington's an extra defensive back out there. I just have a feeling Robert Spears-Jennings is going to win that other safety starting spot. That might be a bold take. We'll see. But I think they love his physicality, his ability to come up and be a run stuffer, as well as somebody that can drop back and cover. He's a big guy. I mean, he's built like a linebacker back there. And so I think that they are really high on him. And again, I think you're going to see a lot of Peyton Bowen this year. I think he's somebody that is going to play a lot more than he did a year ago. Obviously, was dealing with some injuries part of the season last year. I think he's going to play a lot. And then it's those young freshmen. Can they find a role, or is this going to be a red shirt? You got 3 guys in Boganowski, Reggie Powers, Jaden Hardy. Like, can one of those guys, carve out a role? Jaden Hardy, we heard a lot about in the spring.
Might just be a matter of, they might have to kind of not necessarily bank on injuries, but be ready when the time comes, because there are going to be times where somebody gets nicked up and you might have to throw out a Michael Boganowski, or it sounds like a Reggie Powers that had a really good summer coming into, technically his first year in Norman. It will be really interesting to see what they get out of that safety position. I feel like it's definitely a strength when you're talking about the secondary. Yep. And then it kind of rolls into that cornerback group that, as you said, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Woody here, especially early in camp after kind of being moved around during the spring. And then, obviously a guy like a Gentry Williams, who just seems to need to stay healthy. If you can stay healthy and get him out onto the field, he could be a guy that you look up and by the end of the year, maybe he is like a second-team All-SEC type guy.
Gentry Williams has the potential to be, I don't know about a first-round draft pick, but maybe like a day 2 draft pick if he goes out and has just a great year and stays healthy. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that maybe scouts or NFL teams are watching with him right now, is like he has the size, he has the athleticism, he has the ball skills. We saw it last year, when he was healthy, he was one of the best corners in the Big 12 and one of the best in the country. So it sounds like he's had a great summer. He stayed healthy over the summer, has done a really good job. The reviews
looks completely different than what he did a year ago. I know that we mentioned that coming back from some of the summer camps that he helped work.
Again, it's just staying healthy. And then it's that other corner spot. I'm really interested to see, is it a Des Malone who has a lot of experience, played a lot at San Diego State? Is it, Kenai Walker, who I thought finished the year really strong for Oklahoma, came in and played a lot when Gentry was hurt. And then you've got these young guys like a Jacoby Johnson, who had flashed a couple times last year, is a guy that we keep hearing really good reviews about. And then if it isn't one of those guys, does Woody move back to corner? So they have options. And that's the thing about this secondary that I'll leave it with, is like, there's so many guys, and I know there's a lot of people that want to say, well, so Peyton Bowen has to play, or Jacoby Johnson has to get on the field. It's like, this is a good problem to have. Sure. Whereas like I can remember times coming into fall camp where it's like, they got maybe 1-2 corners that you really feel good about. I remember the days of it was Trey Brown and Trey Norwood and no one else. Yeah. After that, and so it's like, I think that Oklahoma's in a really good spot. And so it's going to be interesting to see who maybe stands out in fall camp.
Not to mention, and I included him in some of the highlight package there, but I don't think that you could talk about the secondary as well without mentioning kind of the constant in that, I guess, back end, if you will. I know he's going to play closer to the line. Kendall Dolby's maybe just pound for pound one of the better football players on the team.
And it's hard because when you talk about the secondary, you're like, do you include the cheetah position?
I know. It's kind of a give or take there.
Right. But he's an X factor, and I think that
I don't think he's going to be getting off the field very often. He's one of those guys that it just seems like when Brent was hired, you went back and it was like evaluation and just finding flat out football players. Like Kendall Dolby might be example 1A for me.
And he just fits what they want to do defensively, because you can do so many different things with him. He's not the biggest guy, but he can cover. We saw what they were able to do with him when they would blitz him off the edge. Yeah. I mean, he's just
had the big sack in the Alamo Bowl.
I mean, he's just a twitchy guy, whereas that first year under Brent Venables, it was Deshaun White, and Deshaun White just didn't have the athleticism to maybe do some of the things that Kendall Dolby can do. So, and I think they're going to find roles for guys like Samuel Omosigo, but I think you're right. Like, they might have these formations where Kendall Dolby's out there with an Omosigo and they're doing something different, or a Canick or Kip Lewis or something like that, where they want to have an extra linebacker. But I'm really high on Kendall Dolby as somebody that I think can, if he stays healthy, I think can really be a difference maker for Oklahoma on defense.
That leads into storyline number 4 going into preseason camp, or I guess fall camp technically. I don't know what you guys are calling it out there. I think OU's calling it fall camp. It's not really.
It's
fall,
summer,
though.
yeah.
It's like 1,000 degrees outside. Yeah. But And this was something that we talked about coming out of SEC Media Day, and it was something that you had asked Jeff Lebby about, just in terms of, compare his offense to what Seth wants to be able to do now as he takes over the reins as offensive coordinator alongside Joe John Finley. And, they both obviously are going to want to run the ball. We talked about the offensive line, the importance of that coming together, but just in general, the marriage of Jackson Arnold now as the Oklahoma starting quarterback, as well as Seth Littrell taking over the reins.
It's really interesting because you look at Seth Littrell's past, and he's been an air raid guy. Like, he comes from the Mike Leach coaching tree, Kevin Wilson, like all these great offensive minds. And then he worked under Jeff Lebby, who ran the spread, and OU found a lot of success. I know a lot of people out there weren't the biggest Jeff Lebby fans, but OU did finish top 10 in nearly every category both seasons under Jeff Lebby.
Sure.
And I think that, listening to Seth Littrell talk, listening to Jeff Lebby talk, I think it's going to be kind of this marriage between the spread and the air raid and kind of the tempo that they want to do. Now, I do think that last year you saw Oklahoma really focus on increasing their time of possession. I think that was a big problem under Brent Venables his first year, and he wanted to give his defense a little bit more rest. So I do think you're going to see maybe a little bit less tempo, but I know Seth Littrell is somebody that he's going to want to go fast at times, especially maybe after big plays and things like that. I think Jackson Arnold is very, very comfortable in a tempo offense, so you're going to see that. But I do think you're right. You're going to see some different things in the running game. I think you're going to see some wide splits. You're going to see some outside zone, things like that maybe we didn't always see with Oklahoma under Jeff Lebby. Maybe some less RPOs, things like that. It's going to be interesting because we just we haven't seen it. Sure. We don't know what it's going to look like. And everybody was like, well, the Alamo Bowl, Seth Littrell called the plays. That was still Jeff Lebby's offense. They weren't running what Seth Littrell, they didn't just implement his offense. So I think it's going to be interesting. And then, like I said, the tight end spot, I think is Seth Littrell being a former fullback, being a guy that's taught and coached fullbacks and tight ends for pretty much his entire
working
career.
Along a co-OC who coaches the tight ends, and Joe John Finley.
And then you look at what they did in the portal. It's clearly what they want to do is they want to implement that. And I don't think it was necessarily that Jeff Lebby's offense doesn't use a tight end. It was more so they didn't have one to use, because you saw them use Braden Willis a certain way under Lebby that first year. I think you're going to see more of that where the tight end is more involved. You're going to see some deep shots like we saw there. And I think they're really going to let Jackson Arnold take the reins on this. And I'm curious, what's the OU run game look like quarterback run game? Like, is that something I know Jeff Lebby started implementing last year? Is that something that Seth Littrell wants to do? So it is going to look a little different, but I think you're also going to still see some of the same stuff that you did see under Lebby. Maybe some, everybody gets mad about jet sweeps. You're going to still see some jet sweeps, I think.
Oh no!
And maybe some screen passes to the boundary.
I am kind of interested too, and we've talked so much about Seth Littrell. We talked about Joe John Finley and kind of their new roles. I think it's kind of interesting to see how Bill Bedenbaugh works alongside Seth Littrell as well as Joe John.
Those two guys are old friends, right?
Yeah.
Like, they have worked together before, and I think that's what's going to make this run game maybe a little bit more effective, because they know each other, they know what they're comfortable, and Bill is really good about teaching the same type of schemes that Seth Littrell wants to run, and I think that is something that could really help, especially with them both knowing like this is a new offensive line group. I think that continuity between those two, I think, is going to be a huge help for Oklahoma.
A lot of kind of question marks just going into the season. That leads us to our final, fifth and final kind of storyline going into the beginning of preseason camp for Oklahoma. And it's something that, it's never sexy to talk about until it starts costing you games. And maybe Oklahoma was in that position a year ago. Special teams battles, and we talked about it last week in the wrap up from the coaches luncheon, and kind of the shock that we had when Brent Venables just came out and flat out said that maybe Tyler Keltner is the guy that has the odds on favorite to win that place kicking job. Obviously, Luke Elzinga was really good at the end of last year, but place kicker, and then you start talking about returners and stuff like that, special teams can definitely change the momentum of a game, and then you can win some of these close games if you're in them in the fourth quarter with good special teams.
I've said it before. I mean, you look back at OU's 2 losses last year. Obviously, there was a lot of mistakes on offense and defense that you could say that's why they lost those games. You could also say that about special teams. They had huge hiccups and big moments that maybe turned the tide of the game. And so, they lose by 3 points at OSU. They missed a field goal, right? That's a huge deal. So, I think that I don't know if it's so much that Tyler Keltner is just better than Zach Schmidt in practice. Like, we've heard both have been really good in practice. I think it's more so Britt knows they can't just keep walking Zach Schmidt out there like at this point. And so I'm interested to see what does Tyler Keltner look like. How big is his leg? I think his career long at East Tennessee,
48, 54, 51, and 49 were his top 4 long.
I want to say Zach Schmidt's was 46. I want to say so. I think Tyler Keltner's got a pretty big leg. We'll see how accurate he can be. It's one thing kicking for East Tennessee State, and
sure. Being asked to knock down a 43-yard field goal at the Cotton Bowl or at Auburn or Ole Miss or wherever.
Death Valley, all these places that you think are going to be close games. So that kicking competition, we talk about all these other competitions. This might be the most important one of all of these, right? Like sure. I think that is a valid statement.
Make that argument. It's not crazy.
Right. And I think there's a lot of hope that special teams can improve under Doug Deacon, who they bring in to kind of run the special teams unit. So it's going to be interesting. And then I think returner is really interesting because Gavin Freeman, other than the big punt return in the season opener last year, just wasn't good enough back there at punt return.
I think there was a lot of lost confidence, but it is what it is. That's kind of the situation they were in. They have to find some people that are going to be out there that, don't turn games around because they dropped the ball.
And I'm curious to see, like we talked about Peyton Bowen earlier, and if he's not starting on defense, do you start him at kick returner, at punt returner? Obviously, He was really good at that in high school. We saw him do it some in the spring. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if, he's the guy at punt return or kick return. And then, does it Taylor Tatum? He's somebody that I keep thinking,
kickoff return.
If he's not the starting running back, which none of us anticipate him to do, could he be the starting kick returner?
Sure.
I think that you have so many dynamic guys that you could put back there. And Oklahoma, that is something, again, that if you get a big kick return, it can change the tide of a game. And so I think Brent Venables understands that. I thought his comments last week at the luncheon kind of show how big of an emphasis special teams was, not only in the spring, but is going to be at fall camp. So it's going to be interesting. Again, we focus a lot on the offense and a lot on the defense, and rightfully so, because they control the pace of a game. But special teams really can be the turning point, for a football team like Oklahoma that's kind of on the fence of, can they be that team that can be a playoff team?
Sure. I know that we've talked so much about Zach Alley and, the hire that they made to bring him in, but the Doug Deacon one kind of went under the radar a little bit. And, we talked about it last week just in terms of what he was able to do, I think for the better part of the last 15 years at San Diego State. And that became a very, very good unit out there in the Mountain West.
I think realistically, they could not have made a better hire. Like when you look around, like they weren't going to go just steal, some of these top programs,
sure.
Special teams coaches, like to be able to get somebody like Doug Deacon, who just kind of fell in their lap because he was let go at San Diego State because they have a whole new staff under Sean Lewis out there in San Diego. He was just kind of looking for a job, and it just so happened Oklahoma needed a special teams coordinator, and it worked out perfectly. But yeah, his units across the board have been really efficient. Especially I think his punt teams have been really good. I think field goal kicking has been really good under him. So I'm interested to see what maybe spin he's able to put on Oklahoma. And it's not even so that, Eddie, they need to be so much better. They just need to clean up some mistakes.
Yeah.
There's too many.
Think about the Texas game.
Yeah.
And how many points they gave away because, they had the
block
penalty,
punt for a touchdown.
The block punt. Was it a block punt? I thought they had the kickoff that ended up getting called back because of a penalty.
Yeah.
Turned the momentum of the game.
But wasn't the first Texas's first touchdown a block punt?
I honestly do not remember.
It might have been.
It was a couple years ago.
Maybe
21.
Maybe I'm
in the Caleb Williams game.
But they had a block punt last year, I believe. And then they fumbled several punt returns. Like they just need to clean it up.
Sure.
Like it's not like they need to just change everything. It's like they just need to be more efficient. And also just not make the big mistake.
Certainly had the fumble there in Lawrence that completely changed the game.
That
got
one
Kansas right back into it.
And then just the field goal kicking. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Just because
can't leave points on the table.
It was late in the year last year, Eddie. I mean, we talked about it. It was like at this point, if you cross the 50, just go for it because you have a better chance of picking up a 4th and long than you do making a field goal.
Not the sexiest thing to talk about, but it is very, very important going into the 2025 or 2024 season here for Oklahoma. So those are kind of the 5 storylines that we wanted to identify going into camp. Oklahoma opens practice on Wednesday. A really good time to join Soonerscoop.com. 2 months for $1. Promo code OU1 for you out there on YouTube. Promo is OU1. All you got to do is go to Soonerscoop.com, and it's $1 for 2 months. And, obviously this first month of camp, we're still waiting to see when we're going to be allowed to talk to some people. But
But we'll have a lot of info.
There is going to be a lot of info coming out. The early scrimmages, I know, are kind of, I think do you look at it and you go, oh, this is going to be land changing or, like ground shaking news coming out of it? No. But I do think that you start hearing some guys that go, okay, maybe the light is coming on for somebody.
And we heard those whispers last year. I remember, hearing about certain guys maybe stepping up. I think Caden Green was a big story last year. R. Mason Thomas was somebody that we kept hearing a year ago, and then obviously he got hurt. So there's definitely guys that are going to stand out in fall camp and maybe, earn one of those either starting jobs or a contributing role. And, those first couple weeks, you start hearing those things. And obviously, we'll have that updated on Soonerscoop.com.
It's definitely camp season. It feels like it outside.
I'm ready. Oh, it's so hot. But I'm ready for a game to be played. I know we have a long ways to go still and a lot of things to shake out. But
there is a long way to go, but it's
going to be here quick.
One calendar month.
Right.
And then you're going to be in it. Ready for the start of the 2024 season. The game against Temple, not too far away now as we basically tick down to under 31 days now for Oklahoma to open up the season, which,
crazy.
As we've said on, here on YouTube or on Official 40 or wherever, that it feels like the intrigue going into this season with college football just in general is, not necessarily an all-time high, but it's very, very high.
Well, you combine the realignment with the 12-team playoff, and it's just like, and it just feels like
so
it's
many
wide
new
open.
faces to new places, right?
Yeah, and you look at it and you're like, oh, well, Georgia's the favorite or Ohio State's going to be really good, but you just never know. Like I feel like college football is just it's more wide open than maybe it's been, and that's partly because you just feel differently about the 12-team playoff. Like a team can get hot late in the season, injuries can happen, things like that. So it's going to be fun, man. This is the most excited I've been for a college football season. I think I've said that every single year for the last 10 years. This is
but
the most
this
excited.
one really.
But this one it really is. But it's just Oklahoma. I feel like this is just when you take a step back and you're like, okay, this is a huge year for Oklahoma because Brent Venables' third year. You saw growth last year.
Well, we've seen, kind of get back to what we talked about at the beginning. There's already kind of a narrative out there that, I think there's a lot of people that asked us at SEC Media Days. It's like, if they don't go out and they don't win 8 games or they don't win 9 games this year, how much of the hot seat is Brent going to be on? And those rumors are only, not rumors, but that feeling or that narrative is only going to continue if they enter the SEC and have a little bit of trouble.
Exactly, and it's just they are taking a big gamble, right, on Jackson Arnold. They're taking a big gamble on all the new offensive linemen that they had to bring in. There's just so many questions with this team, but it's kind of exciting because I think that they feel like, and we feel like, that they have a chance to maybe surprise some people.
Make a little noise. There's some pieces in place.
Exactly.
Especially on the defensive side of the ball where, we talked about that secondary. We didn't even talk about the linebackers because I don't even think that is really a massive story. It's probably the deepest position on the team right now.
Let me ask you this, Eddie. When's the last time we went into a fall camp and we said, OU's defense is the strength of this football team?
I mean, it's been so long.
I think it's been over a decade, probably.
Yeah, it's definitely been over a decade. I would probably say like that 2011 team, or maybe the 2010-ish type team. Yeah. When I think there was still a little bit of relevancy with the Stoops brothers and everything that they had built in that not the early portions of 2000, but on the back end with some of the better defenses that they had. We said it before. This is I don't even think it's a controversial thing to say. On paper, this is the best defense Oklahoma's put on the field in maybe 2 decades. Yeah,
and it's just been a total culture change, I think, for Oklahoma.
It's kind of wild how it's like just completely flipped in
and how quickly.
2 years.
Right, and I think that's a testament to Brent Venables. Now they just have to go out and show it because, like you said, on paper it looks great. Now you got to go prove it, and I think that Oklahoma has the players to do that. Obviously, you got to have some things break your way. That's college football. You got to stay healthy, things like that. You got to have young guys step up in certain spots in big moments. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think there's going to be a lot of close football games. People are going to be sweating it out. But I'm looking forward to it, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be here before we know it. And as I say that, I guess if tomorrow, if you're into that and the practice beginning, it's here. For George Stoia, I'm Eddie Radosevich. We will see you right back here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube.